Thank you, Rackspace, for employing Michael. He's a great guy. And yes, the reason he's not here is he's just having, well, his wife is having a child. So he apologises he couldn't make it. And we've got Robert as stand-in for Michael. So please take it away, Robert.
Thank you. Now I get applause? Right, so Michael is probably much better suited to present this, as he's a Core Nova reviewer and also on the security team, and he talked about both of these things during it. So I'm going to do my best to do it justice, and thank you for your patience. So Michael has this very, very positive idea. He wants more people to contribute to OpenStack. Get more people reviewing, get more people getting code up and patches up. It's a big project. There's a lot of areas that people can contribute to. And in particular, he was presenting this at the OpenStack Summit in Portland. And I think it was Portland. Yeah, Portland. If you're at the summit and you're not there selling some hardware switch or something like that, then you really want to be able to develop and contribute directly to OpenStack, because it's much more productive to say, here is the change I want, than to convince someone else the change is necessary and wait while they do it. So he talked people through giving an actual patch up, and what we're going to do in the Hackfest this afternoon will hopefully be very much the same thing. So this is right in line with the sort of way we're structuring the day. Now, a lot of projects have this idea of a core member or a core committer, but OpenStack has core reviewers. And the definition of a core reviewer is someone who is consistently giving good and effective reviews on an extended period of time, like, sorry, one second. Hay fever, I think. So a core reviewer is someone who maybe has been doing 2 reviews a day within Nova over a 3-month period. They've probably written a reasonable amount of code as well, but the key thing is they've read even more code. So they're familiar with all of the code base. When someone comes in, they can say, hey, this patch, this looks very similar to this thing over there. Why don't you try and combine them rather than adding duplicate code into the code base? So you can start building and keeping a tradition around what code looks like, where code should live, and a lot of that stuff can get written down as rules that you can encode, but then people still need to have them internalized. They need to know to look for those when they're doing a review. And so that's the difference between any one of us who can just review and a core reviewer who can say, yes, this meets the standards, it meets the layout we want, it meets the style guide that we have, and this is okay to come into the code base. Becoming a core reviewer is basically just a matter of acting like a core reviewer for an extended period of time, and then they'll notice you. The team size of the core review team is usually kept fairly small, like 8 or 10 people. And I believe that's mainly to keep the ability to coordinate the traditions and the style consistency effective. Having a big team, it's much easier to get skew occurring between different reviewers, and once that creeps into the code base, you've then got the position where you can't say, hey, this is our coding style anymore, because actually yesterday someone did something completely different, or different enough to start being a problem. So the first thing you need if you're going to contribute something to OpenStack is a LaunchPad account. LaunchPad is a web service run by Canonical, and the OpenStack project uses it for bug tracking, for blueprints tracking, which is the conceptual design review process. There was discussion earlier on today about, is there a kind of meta level, it's not the code review, but is this conceptually a good idea, is the approach correct? And that's done at the design sessions at the summit and is encoded in blueprints. Some group management is done in LaunchPad, but I believe the Foundation infra team has largely moved away from that. In particular, the bug tracking groups are still on LaunchPad. So if you want to be able to set bug priority and do triage, and more people need to do that all the time, you can join those groups on LaunchPad very easily. Some mailing lists are on LaunchPad. Most of them are on list.openstack.com. now, and more are migrating over. Every OpenStack project gets a LaunchPad project, and this is just the way it's done. That gives you your bug tracker. Why not GitHub, or why not? Doesn't matter. LaunchPad is the thing that was set up at the beginning, and it's fit for purpose, so it's still being used. There is discussion about changing this, in particular to deal with the needs of designers who want to capture graphic images and have a richer forum for looking at the design of things, which folk who are working on the plumbing generally don't need, but that still hasn't come to any sort of conclusion yet. And as Michael says, keep the username short and descriptive. So the default one is the first part of your email address with a hyphen after it with the domain if that one's already taken. You probably want to change it. Put your IRC handle in there. Go to launchpad.net, top right, click on login and register, and it'll step you through creating an account. If you've already got one, great. If you're not going to send a patch up today, don't worry about doing that. Otherwise, you should do that now. The next thing after you get a LaunchPad account is to get a Gerrit account. And Gerrit is the code review system that OpenStack uses. Again, you go to the website review.openstack.org, top right, click on sign in, and it uses OpenID onto LaunchPad. So it will take you straight back to LaunchPad and ask you to allow it to sign in. Now, the reason this is really important is not just that you need to be able to go into the review system and say, hey, no, it doesn't need to be this way when someone gives you a review saying something should be different, but you can't actually upload code to the review system until you've got an account. So you have to do this to get your patch up there for people to see it. You could put it on GitHub, but nobody in the OpenStack community goes and looks on GitHub for patches. It would just rot if you do that. You also need to set an SSH key. They used to auto-sync them from LaunchPad, but apparently there's some reliability issues, so it no longer gets done. Once you log in, on the top right, you get a, there's a screenshot here somewhere. Nope, he used an actual browser in the presentation. I will have to show you that separately. But up the top right, basically where the arrow is, you get a settings link once you sign in, and you can use that to add a key. I'm going to assume everyone here is fairly familiar with that. You copy your public key, not the private key, into the web form, and away you go. And here's the kicker. OpenStack has a contributor license agreement. This says copyright license agreement. I believe it's actually a contributor license agreement, not a copyright license agreement. So ignore that part of it. If you're a corporate, you need your corporate law attorney or whoever to sign the corporate version of it. And once that's done, then you can upload code. And the reason you can't upload code without this done is that OpenStack can't accept the code without a CLA. And they need that because the CLA is what gives them the right to redistribute and so on. So, to avoid any sort of taint or whatever, they just block it out completely. So the very first thing you do. Once you've done that, though, you're then in a position to get code uploaded and reviewed. You still need to get involved in the development community, though. So you should join mailing lists, and you should join IRC channels and so on. On list.openstack.org, there's this list up here: announce, dev, foundation, docs, operators, security, and on Launchpad, ~OpenStack is the users mailing list there. I'm not actually on all of these, so I don't know how much it really matters if you're on them, but it's probably a good idea. Depends on what you're going to be doing to a degree. Announce is very low volume. Dev varies between completely silent and insanely busy. Operators is quite quiet. These channels, you should be, if you're doing development, you really want to be on the OpenStack dev channel. The infra channel is where discussions about problems with Gerrit, problems with Jenkins or Zool occur. So if you are trying to get your patch landed and you need to know what's going on, that's the place to hang out, or at least to join.
Can I just say about the mailing lists? Because OpenStack dev sometimes does get completely nuts, filled with messages. I think one day I saw something like 200 was the max I've seen in one day. If you don't want that much spam, there are topic filters, so people put inside square brackets the particular product they're working on, like Nova or Swift or something like that, and you can set up your mail client to filter that so you don't get completely drowned if one of the other OpenStack projects does crazy things.
Yeah, and you can also subscribe and turn off mail delivery and then use one of the online, the website name's gone from my head, but there's sites that collect the lists and you can just read them in a web UI if you want to do it that way. So with the IRC channels, if you live on IRC, just join them all. If you don't, then I suggest that you join them when you want to have a discussion about stuff. And lots of people just sign in and out all the time, so it's cool to do it either way. There are, but to a degree, you'll get told to go there when it matters. Like if you join Hash OpenStack Neutron or Quantum, I think the IRC channel hasn't renamed yet, there is absolutely no point being there because none of the reviewers live there. So you can't ask for anything except occasional discussion with other, it's not as effective a channel as, say, OpenStack Nova, where a lot of people hang out and, So this will get you in the door, and Dash Dev has probably still the largest cross-section of people. So it's not that they're not valuable, it's that cognitive overload. You're going to do one patch today and you're going to join 7 channels is maybe a bit out of kilter. So I can't remember what he said when the no wait seriously thing was there.
So many different communications.
Yeah, I think that's what he was talking about. And I mean, oh, that's right. He said, look, this is a lot of infrastructure you need to have. Why do you need to have that much infrastructure to commit to an open source or to get a patch up for review in an open source project? And his theory, and I think I agree with him, is that it's a scale problem. We've got the structural stuff to protect people who are contributing so that organisations feel comfortable contributing. That's the legal aspects of it. And you've got the social aspects of coordinating over 1,000 developers. That's not trivial to do. And we're doing it in a complete democracy. It's not like Linux where there's a Linus who will say, hey, it's got to be this way every now and then. There's actually no one person who can sit down and say that. Everyone's voted into their roles by people who have seen them doing a good job, and they can lose it. If they don't keep doing a good job, it'll stop. So it's quite a different structure. These instructions are not the instructions that we're doing for the Hackfest. This is for setting up a development environment on your laptop without a VM, so without DevStack. And a warning, never, ever, 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 ever run DevStack on your machine. Run it inside a VM on your machine. If you run it on your machine, you will never get your machine to work the way it did before. I'm serious. It changes VM write-back ratios, it adds bridges, it installs Open vSwitch. If you aren't familiar with all of these bits, it will be a devil of a time for you to track it down and undo it. And it's changing it to be appropriate for something that's hosting KVM VMs for a test cloud. And that's probably not what your machine is. So these instructions here will let you run tox -epy27 and run the test suite for Nova without having done DevStack or anything else. But the VM on that stick is a much faster way. All of these steps are already done as part of the installation of DevStack. Generally, Jarrett creates a topic when you upload a branch based on the name of the branch. So creating a local branch before you push your code up for review tells Jarrett the name to show other people when they see it in the review. So you can just push everything from master, and some people do that. But if you've got multiple patches in flight, some of them are going to land before others, and you probably don't want to force a dependency chain where none actually exists. So it's best to create lots and lots of little branches, and only where things are actually connected, keep them as a multiple commits on one branch. Jarrett works in the sort of idealized Git sense, which is to say that each commit that goes through to master was an independent commit with no other baggage. And what this means is that you don't push up some code and then do some commits to fix it and push those up as additional commits to Gerrit. What you do is you just keep rebasing and editing your local commit and amending it, and you keep replacing the commit that Gerrit is reviewing until it gets approved and then goes through a merge and land process. This can be quite a shock for people who are used to different ways of working. So for people who work with GitHub, for example, where they often will just push up incremental commits rather than a completely rebased patch. Michael fixed a patch in a presentation 4 months ago. This is not, I'm not Michael, but I'm going to talk you through it. It's not that I can't fix a patch, it's that I probably can't do this bit of it justice, particularly as the bug is closed. I don't want to close any of the bugs we've got reserved for the Hackfest this afternoon. But the interesting bits aren't actually watching him do it, it's having a look at how you take a bug report and figure out what's going on. So this is the sort of trace that you get out of an OpenStack log file when something's gone wrong, and this is what was in the bug report. Now that, I don't know if you guys can see the red dot. I can't, but that's my colour blindness at work. So up the top, that instance ID, that's generally the thing you want to grep on when you're debugging so something's gone wrong. If Nova list shows an instance as an error, take the UID for the instance and just grep every log file in /var log for that instance ID. And then you'll get the actual Python traceback captured, and then you can see it unwind. And in fact, most of this traceback here is the RPC layer being very, very proud that it successfully reported an error that occurred somewhere else. So when you see the RPC stuff in there, you can pretty much just ignore all of that. The thing that matters here, as you can see, the very bottom line and the very top line have exactly the same error, and that's the actual error, which is a key error. Hostname is not present in the code about that line. So this one interesting thing will be whether or not that code still exists. So here Michael called it out, right? So Nova vert libvirt driver pi. Right, so he did some performance art. Right. You probably want a bigger font. Now, where did that presentation go? We're looking at Nova Compute Manager.py. And somewhere near line 3000 in pre-live migration. So I'd probably just search for pre-live migration, and we'll find a function here that looks plausible. But we were looking for Nova vert libvirt driver.py. Yeah. Thank you for the bug fix. So one of the problems we get in a lot of these sorts of functions is they can get quite windy. Anyway, so this locals thing is something that I've fixed. But what that looks like to me is that they were expecting the symbol, the variable hostname to be present in the local context, and the error that they were trying to print was blowing up because it was no longer set there. So if we look at, I bet you that so locals is not there anymore because it led to these sorts of bugs. So there's been a cleanup effort in the last few months in Nova to just remove all of that code. And instead they explicitly format the local variables that they want to have there. And what was the one that it was missing? It was missing hostname. So we've got get hypervisor hostname. The code's been refactored. I can't show you the bug because it's been fixed. I'm sorry. But the basic process of starting at the back trace, starting at the bottom line of it, going and finding the code, and then sniffing around until you figure out what goes on is going to apply all the time. So the next thing he did is ran the tests. So I use virtualenv very, very heavily, and I also use LXC. So this will just take me a second. I can't remember if I have an LXC container for this or not. I can't remember my password either. How are we going for time, Tom? So I do this because I'm terrified of horrible dependency interactions forcing me to install and uninstall and reinstall packages in my base environment. So I just create a separate dedicated development environment, kind of like the DevStack image, but these are lightweight containers that I can do all my work in. Is that not loaded? No. All right. Anyway, so this is basically, you do that and it will take a while and then it will do the stuff. So since you don't want to wait for that, we'll go through the slides. So when you push something up to Gerrit, the next thing that happens, or the very first thing that happens, is that Zool picks up the change you've got and says, okay, let's schedule a test run for this. And it will run a PEP8 check and make sure that you've got the right syntax in your code and that the automated style checks are happy with what's going on. It will also run your code, the unit tests, and it will run a Tempest run against your code change. And if your code is in something like oslo.config that gets brought into lots of different places, then it may run multiple different unit test runs. So Zool is a scheduler for Jenkins that's improved, by which I mean it scales. Jenkins doesn't scale in that dimension. But the actual test runs get handed off to Jenkins instances that are provisioned by the infra team and actually execute the tests and then report back to Gerrit whether something succeeded or failed. And the easiest way to look at that is for me to just go to review.openstack.org and show you something. This will do. So this is a change I have to rename a project that was inconsistently named. The red cross here says do not land this. And that's because when they land a rename, it's complex. So they're saying, look, don't accidentally land this. They are actually going to land it, but just not accidentally. We have the list, the sort of status of the change, the files of the change, and how much code changes occurred in them. And then you can click through to each one to see the actual diff of what changed. But here's the thing I was talking about. So the first thing that happened after I uploaded it was that Jenkins was, so it reports as Jenkins, but it's actually Zool because Zool collects the results from all the Jenkins runs. Ran 5 different test runs, a configuration comparison, a config gate layout, a puppet lint, a puppet syntax check, and a pyflakes check. They all reported back okay, so this patch could in principle land. It then gets people coming through and saying it looks okay to me, and if it says in brackets core reviewer, I think that means they gave you a +2. Yeah. So it's not actually whether they are a core reviewer or not, it's whether they were able to give you a +2 and chose to. If they just give you a 1, I think it says just reviewer there, even if they are allowed to give you a +2. When it's ready to land, the reviewer will say approved, and the general policy is that you need 2 reviewers to +2 something to make it land. What it looks like to a reviewer when they do that is they get this interface where they can say approved, and you can actually just click on that. So you'd say +2, looks good to me, core reviewer, and it's approved, but most people don't see that. You only see that when you're a core reviewer on a project. So what else happens? Then other reviewers come along, people come along, they review it, they decide the code's good or bad, and they say, okay, land it. At that point, Zool kicks off another test run. So Gerrit says, okay, it's time to land it. And instead of assuming that it still works, because the last test run might have been a few days ago, they put it into a test run against the current tip of OpenStack, all the projects, make sure it still works, and if it works, it gets landed immediately. And there's an interesting thing they do here. They actually do a speculative pipeline, the same as CPUs do. They'll run 5 or 10 or 20 patches in a row, all running separate tests, stacked up on each other. And if they all pass, they only land the top one, so everything lands all at once. But if the first 5 pass and the 6th one failed, the first 5 land, the 6th gets taken out of the queue, and the test runs for the ones that were dependent on it. Now, I don't mean dependent on it in the sense that the code was dependent on it, but in terms of the pipeline of landing dependency, they get rescheduled and start over again. So the test runs that were running get thrown away, and it kicks off again. And what this means is that if you take an hour to run tests, you're not actually limited to 24 patches landing a day. And Tempest takes about an hour to run all the tests. I think it's 40 minutes for Tempest, and then there's other overheads and so on. So if when patches are reviewed and you get a +2 and it's approved, 95% of the time they still pass, then 95% of the time you could have a queue of 10 or 20 patches and they'll all come in that 40-minute latency window, because it only takes as long to approve them as the single longest test run for the one at the end, plus the time between, you know, how long it took people to click approve as you're building up that pipeline. But if one of them fails, it's a pipeline stall and it's hugely expensive. So fragile tests matter a huge amount to OpenStack because of this, and Tempest is kind of the primary example of fragile tests at the moment. Where are we? We're back here. Okay. So Michael recommends testing your changes in DevStack. So having DevStack running, dropping your patch in there and making sure you can reproduce it and that it works. I'm a bit on this. Most of the developers I know, they don't do that. Arguably you should do it because it helps other developers, but it's actually, there's a fair bit of machinery you need to move stuff from one place to the other, or you have to do your development environment in a DevStack setup, which is less convenient because you're going to be in a VM because you don't want it breaking your actual machine, so you're going to have to network mount the source or whatever. Git review will do the push to Gerrit for you. What actually happens under the hood is it just pushes to a well-known location, and Gerrit goes, oh, okay, introspects the data and creates a branch on the fly for you. The git review -s will set up git review in your local tree for you, and that sets up a pre-commit hook that will set a commit change ID, and that's what Gerrit uses to track this is the same change, even if it comes from different people, or when you keep rebasing and altering your change over time. So that's the last line down the bottom there. Never add one of those to a patch by hand, never copy it from one patch to another if you're making another variation of the patch, and never edit it. Just treat it as something opaque that the system will put there for you and maintain. If you know enough to argue with that statement, you know enough to deal with the consequences, so don't bring it up. Yes, yes. So I just told you about the review process and merging on, and vulnerability management. So vulnerability management is a dedicated team, a small team that respond to vulnerabilities reported in OpenStack and coordinate getting them fixed, getting them tested, doing that under embargo, and then notifying the CV and the distros and the public clouds that this is going on. What you guys need to know about that is if you think you've got a security vulnerability, report it as a bug on LaunchPad, mark it as a private security bug. If a bug is reported public, the OpenStack vulnerability team will not make it private, they will not hide it, they will not go through embargo for it, because once it's out there, as far as they're concerned, it's out there. A malicious actor who's tracking the OpenStack development environment will be subscribed to the bug feed and will see every new bug, and it's too late once you've announced it. If you're not sure, and maybe it's just a privacy thing, and you're not entirely, you think you found a DOS, but you're not entirely sure, still mark it as private security, and if it's not, we can always open it up without doing the full embargo thing, that's fine. Most bugs, though, just file them as normal bug. It's just if you think it's security, really treat it with appropriate caution. Michael thanks you.
Thank you, Michael.
Any questions about getting started with the development with OpenStack?
Someone said something about power boards.
Back of the room.
So I saw a little box somewhere which had a bunch of power boards in them. It might be worth grabbing that.
Yeah, I believe the back 2 rows of chairs have power boards within easy reach.
You mentioned the code review process. How does that actually work with OpenStack? I've actually never used Garrett before.
You click on it and you type things in. No, I'm serious. I'm not trolling. That's how easy it is. So if we take this patch, which is a patch I have reviewed, so I won't actually change it, but you click on a file to bring up the diff for the file, but say I didn't like this part of the change. I think you double click. I've got finger memory, right? But you double click there and then you say, this is bong. It should totally be click on save, it saves it. No one can see this yet. Once you've done all of the changes you want to do, all of the edits, you go to the review interface and everyone gets this much, right? You click -1. If you're not a core, you don't get the +2 and the -2, but you still get the +1, -1. So you say -1, you say, hey, got a small issue, could you da-da-da-da-da, and then you say publish comments. And at that point, it commits them all publicly, and you can't edit them anymore. So get the swear words out before you click on publish comments.
What does that look like to the person who submitted the change?
It looks like more work they need to do. It looks like, so I guess there's 2 angles. One is you get the commentary at the bottom, like these comments down here, you can see that you can click on and you can see that content there is what you put in the dialog box in the review page where you say, whatever. The actual individual per file comments show up the top here. Now, you can see where it says 1 draft on the screen. If you go back to an old version of the patch set, right, then you can see the comments that were made against that version. So I find this really annoying. I'd really like all the comments to be visible at the top so I could just say, here are the things that have been commented on, and I'd like it to say something like, 3 old, 2 new, and that way I wouldn't need to grovel back through, but it's minor. This is the way it works. You go in, click on the patch set to get the comments for that patch set. And when someone uploads a new patch set, just because they're rebased or something, it can look like there are no comments, and it's still got a -1. You need to click back through and find the actual comments. And then when you go into a file, if you click on patch sets at the top, there are the different versions of the file that are uploaded as part of this change ID over time. So to see what changed, actually probably you'd do it the other way around. Oh, by the way, this is the most annoying bit ever. No, just... Huh? Cool. I will tell the infra team.
So I think that's coming. There were just a few things where the infrastructure team had to change what they were doing with Garrett, so they actually had to fork it, and now they're in the process of merging everything back upstream so they can upgrade.
The UI quirk aside, here I've said show me the actual diff, and that was where I can see whether this was or was not handled.
Looks like everyone just wants to do it.
Great. Well, we should have another presentation from me and let them go to sleep, right? I'm getting good at putting my daughter to sleep, so...
Sounds like a plan.
Do you have another question? No? You just... And the hand up at the back, but I think that's an itchy head rather than a question, so...
Well, if that's the case, is it now time to start the Hackfest?